Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are honored to be hosting a roundtable with Congressman DeFazio. We will hear today from 3 cities.
That will be dealt with.
Please
Someone needs to mute.
Everyone. Please mute yourself if you would. Awesome. And today, we will hear from 3 cities whose challenges with wastewater infrastructure needs are emblematic of many of the challenges communities throughout Oregon are facing today. Also joining us today, we have Mayor Dan Sheets and Steve Martinenko, Interim City Manager with the City of Monroe, Chris Bailey, Public Works Director for the City of Albany, and Matt Stouter with the Metropolitan Wastewater Commission that serves Springfield, Eugene, and parts of Lane County. But first, I'd like to introduce Congressman Peter DeFazio, Chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that has jurisdiction over all modes of transportation and many aspects of our national infrastructure, including wastewater infrastructure. He is here today to talk about his $50 billion bill to address wastewater issues in communities around the country, the Water Quality Protection and Jobs Creation Act of 2021. Congressman DeFazio, take it away.
Well, thanks, and thanks everybody for being on. Seems like we have a good amount of interest. You know, it's been the last time the Clean Water SRF was reauthorized was 1988. That's you know, a pretty long stretch of time. And as a consequence, since it expired, what we've been doing on an annual basis is reauthorizing temporarily through an appropriations bill. Doesn't make exactly for long-term or good planning, and obviously also the amounts of money are totally inadequate to meet the needs. Federal government used to be a great partner. I was a county commissioner when we established the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. I live in Springfield. Springfield and Eugene had, we're going to keep our stuff separate. We had separate systems. And then as the area grew, we realized we had to hammer out a plan to serve the whole metropolitan and potentially growing metropolitan area. And we had a great partner in the federal government. We had a 75% federal match back in those days, as did many other entities around the country. Now, MWMC has been upgraded, updated, and you know, dealing with new issues as they go along. Still viable, but many communities have systems that are outdated, outmoded, inadequate. Some don't even have systems at all. You know, I lost the community of Blue River in my district, and one of the big issues is they didn't have a compliant system for waste, and how do we rebuild that community and meet current standards? So I've proposed on a bipartisan basis a bill that would put in $50 billion over a 5-year period. And that would be, the SRF would be $40 billion, and then other programs, including direct grants to communities that are distressed and can't even access the SRF because the rates would end up being way too high, even with very low interest rates, to help those totally deprived communities. The great news is, in addition to dealing with clean water and environmental issues, and you know, I'm old enough to remember when the Willamette River just right over there was an open sewer, and rivers back east caught fire. That was absurd. It's been I think 48 years. We're in the 49th year, almost 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. But you know, the federal government needs to step up. The EPA estimates the unmet needs to bring systems up to a state of good repair and adequacy is $271 billion over the next 10 years. I've got a number for Oregon here. I'll find it in a second, but Oregon has a very, 15.786 billion according to a PSU for the next 20 years. That's a big piece of change for a little state like Oregon. So we need a partner. I did move this as part of the Invest Act out of the House last year, which was then put into the moving forward, which I carried on the floor, which included provisions from other committees, drinking water from the Energy and Commerce Committee. And we did get it through the House. We lost 2 Democrats who both lost their election, and we got 3 Republicans who are back. So I expect we can do something similar out of the House again this time. And now we have the full support of the President of the United States and his administration. They've proposed a very robust title dealing with water quality issues as part of Build Back Better. They go beyond what we had proposed in the last Congress to, in addition to significant investments in drinking water and wastewater, to set an objective of replacement of all lead pipes in the United States in the over an 8-year period. Actually, I just heard something from an Indian tribe recently. They have asbestos pipes, which I'd never heard of before. But there's a lot of things out there that need to be replaced, and this bill, as part of the larger moving forward package, will get it done. So I'm bringing my sensitivity as a former county commissioner and someone who saw his community benefit immeasurably with that federal help to a national scope now that I chair the committee, and want to hear from you folks today about your needs. So with that, I'd be happy to move on with the agenda.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Congressman, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so important, and we really appreciate it and appreciate your time today. And we're going to turn it over now to 3 communities that have agreed to share their perspectives on wastewater infrastructure needs. And we are going to start with Mayor Dan Sheets and Steve Martinenko, Interim City Manager for the City of Monroe.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you to Mayor Hayes for this opportunity to chat today. And I also want to thank Congressman DeFazio as well for your time. I appreciate it. As Tracy mentioned, I'm the mayor of the City of Monroe, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce our interim city administrator, Steve Martinenko. Steve will share our city's wastewater challenges. So I will go ahead and hand this over to him. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Sheets, and thank you, Congressman DeFazio, for letting us share our information. I just came over from a water plant. As in many small cities, I am also the water operator and wastewater operator. And this is, I'm sure, no surprise to you in most small communities where we all wear many, many hats. I just went through our water and wastewater plans, master plans. And at the moment, to bring up to good repair and regulatory adequacy, we would need about $3.2 million to basically repair pipes that have been in the ground since 1916 or before. It's rather critical for us. When I run my tests each month to meet regulatory compliance, we run into problems where there's so much stormwater into our systems that are leaking into our pipes that even though our lagoons are doing a great job, they simply don't meet the compliance requirements as they exist now. As you know, these permits in Oregon are being rewritten. So part of our issue is that when they get rewritten and they become more stringent, we are going to have some really serious problems with our system. Although a lot of our equipment has been replaced, some of it in the last 10 years, it is now considered to be inadequate, particularly when we look at our development situation. Monroe has been a very small little town. Some have described it as a speed bump between Eugene and Corvallis, but we have a 55-unit development that's nearing completion in one part of town, and developers who are looking at 90 to 110 units in the northeast portion of our town. There's no way that our infrastructure is adequate to support that kind of development that our town desperately needs in order to maintain the revenue that is required to maintain the existing infrastructure that we have. And last, even though this bill and what's being talked about is wastewater infrastructure, we have a very sophisticated little water plant that unfortunately is also very expensive to operate. And we have to go between, where do we spend our money? Our scarce dollars go to water, or does it take care of our wastewater infrastructure? So in that respect, this bill, the potential for being able to replace our aging infrastructure that is well over 100 years old is desperately needed. And so the support is well appreciated, and we're looking forward to as many options as we can in order to fix this system. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Steve. And next up, we have Chris Bailey, Public Works Director with City of Albany.
Thank you, Tracy and Congressman DeFazio. It's nice to be with you today. As Tracy said, I'm the Public Works Director in Albany. Just for some context, Albany's current population is approximately 55,000 people, and our water reclamation facility has an average dry weather flow of 12.3 million gallons per day. So quite a bit bigger than Monroe, quite a bit smaller than Eugene and Springfield. And I'd also like to point out that our WRF is jointly owned by the cities of Albany and Millersburg. Millersburg is a small city directly to the north of Albany, about 2,800 people. And we have treatment and operating cost share agreements with Millersburg. So Millersburg co-owns the facility, and Albany operates the plant and holds the MPDS permit. So I want to talk about sewer rate affordability as it relates to major infrastructure projects. As everyone knows, the number and type of pollutants that wastewater treatment facilities are required to address continues to grow. Some of these new pollutants are very difficult to treat with existing technology at our treatment plants. Adding treatment options to comply with the limits for these new pollutants is often very expensive. In Albany, we currently generate our sewer capital money through rates and SDCs, and we have taken out SRF loans in the past. And for most of all of our municipalities, these large capital projects are difficult to pay for with existing rates, which also have to pay for ongoing operating costs and routine capital projects like pipe replacements, et cetera. I think the main difference is that how we might define a large project would vary between all of us, but we all have a threshold beyond which we just can't afford to fund a project, and we have to look outside for funding. We have 2 SRF loans right now. They came with a 30-year payback period, and of course we have to demonstrate that we generate enough revenue to cover the annual debt payments. So while the ratepayer doesn't have to pay up front, they're paying obviously for these things over time. In the last decade or two, we've been fortunate to be able to time our major investments so that as one debt was satisfied and came off the books, we then later on were able to look for a new loan when we had the next big project. So that's one way we try to control our sewer rate impacts, is by not taking on concurrent long-term debt. However, the new pollutant limits are happening at less than a 30-year interval. So we have to build a $12 million project one year, and then within 5 years, we get a new permit and have a new requirement that costs another $10 million. We would have to find another way to fund that. And we don't want to stack debt upon debt. That becomes unsustainable very quickly. And the other thing to keep in mind is Albany, like most every place, we have the same customer base paying sewer bills, stormwater bills, water bills, often contributing to the general fund through property taxes. Many municipalities also have other funds, other fees that fund services such as public safety or parks and rec or transportation. And so as a full service city, when we consider raising rates for one utility, such as wastewater, we in Albany are always looking at the broader impact. What's going on with our local levies? What do the other service fees look like? What is this cumulative effect that we're putting onto our citizenry? So because of all that, grants or forgivable loans or things of that nature would be very helpful as we have to look forward to making significant investments in our system so that we can continue to provide high quality treatment, but recognize that our ratepayers are going to get to the point where they can't fully bear the cost of those investments. And so with that, I'll wrap up my remarks and pass it back to Tracy.
Thank you, Chris. And we will open this up to questions after our last speaker. So because of the number of participants that we have, if you want to go ahead and start entering any questions into the chat so that we can try and manage that portion. There are quite a few of you on the line. So make sure to enter any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll try and get through as many as we can after we hear from Matt Stouter. Matt is the Executive Officer for the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission and also serves as the Environmental Services Director for the City of Springfield. So Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Congressman, for allowing me to be here today. Good afternoon, everybody. As Tracy said, I'm Matt Stouter, Executive Officer for the MWMC. For context, we serve approximately 250,000 residents in the Eugene-Springfield metropolitan area, as well as portions of Lane County. And our treatment facility has an average dry weather flow of about 30 million gallons a day. We have a 7-member commission that's responsible for oversight of our regional program, made up of elected officials from the 3 agencies we serve, as well as citizen reps that are appointed. As Congressman mentioned, he served us during the early years when we started, right as our treatment plant facility came online. And he referenced the construction grants program opportunity that we were able to take advantage of, which was extremely helpful. So I'd like to speak briefly about some upcoming challenges that we're facing. Probably the single biggest challenge we're facing right now is that how to pay for needed investments for water quality requirements that are becoming increasingly more stringent, while at the same time addressing the needs of our aging infrastructure. So the issue of ratepayer affordability has been mentioned, and it's a major concern. Like most municipalities, we fund investments through user fees and SDCs, and our most recent NPDES permit required us to invest nearly $200 million to meet those water quality requirements. And we're expecting DEQ to issue us a new permit this calendar year. To fund those requirements for the last permit, we needed to sell bonds, 2 separate bond sales totaling $98 million. And ultimately, it was the users of our system that had to pay for those investments. While we're fortunate to have a large population base to spread out those costs can only be spread so far. That's why I think the SRF funding and the grant opportunities proposed in this bill are so important. Having the federal government as a partner to help pay for the water quality challenges that we're all facing is crucial. Looking ahead, we expect temperature compliance to meet thermal load limits to be one of our main challenges. These requirements, which are being exacerbated by climate change, are going to require us to invest, $12 to $15 to $20 million over the next several years to meet. So one strategy that will help us meet this challenge will be to expand our water reuse program. So for every gallon of water that we can reuse elsewhere and keep out of the river, there's a corresponding heat load reduction to that receiving water body. However, in order for us to produce reliable Class A recycled water, we're going to be looking at an initial investment of about $6 to $7 million, ultimately giving us the capability to produce about 1.3 million gallons of recycled water per day. That water can be used to improve drought resiliency, especially related to industrial aggregate applications and green infrastructure maintenance. The $1 billion in grants proposed with this bill for alternative water source projects offers us a chance to fund some of that work in partnership with the federal government and provide needed relief for our ratepayers who are already bearing the costs associated with the operations, maintenance, and everything else associated with our capital programs. So lastly, one major concern that keeps me up at night is the issue of contaminants of emerging concern, known as CECs, chemicals like PFAS. They threaten the beneficial reuse associated with our cycled water and our biosolids applications programs. Where the regulations ultimately end up for CECs is just starting to play out, but what we're already seeing is that it's going to be very costly to deal with. We expect significant investments will be needed in the form of capital improvements, as well as programmatically in terms of our pre-treatment and our communications programs to help address these issues. So with that, I will turn it back to Tracy.
Hey, Tracy, I might respond quickly, and then we can move on to more general questions to some of the points that were raised. With Monroe, you know, the 100 years old. That's absolutely amazing. I mean, Monroe would be the kind of community that I think would qualify for my proposed grant program, having relatively small ratepayer base and having needs that are quite expensive. That's why I'm setting aside a fair amount, 10 billion of the 50 for that. The other key is, and this goes actually to all three, is that Frank Pallone, who's the chair of the Energy Commerce Committee, and I proposed in the CARES Act and subsequent legislation that we had trouble getting through the Senate, that we create a new program that would be a lot like the Energy Assistance Program, which is income-based, where we would have a permanent federal program to help people with their water and wastewater costs, pretty critical. And this became incredibly apparent during times of COVID. You know, I mean, how are you going to be washing your hands and doing all the things you're supposed to do if your water's shut off? So we're going to push really hard for that. I don't know every detail that's in the president's proposal. You know, they basically provided me a 25-page outline. I've talked to Secretary Buttigieg and other high-ranking people in the White House. But I'm hopeful that somewhere in there we can fit in a ratepayer assistance program that's income-based that would help with the issues that all three of you raised. And then the forever chemicals that was just raised. I have a specific proposal to help deal with PFAS. But the other end of that is we really got to crank down on the pollution itself and the products that are getting PFAS into the environment, which the last administration, you know, was unwilling to do. I'm quite certain this administration, I've talked to the EPA administrator, and you know, they are going to be proposing regulations that will help try and keep this stuff out of the environment, because once it's in the environment, it's, I mean, like they say, they're called forever chemicals, and it's virtually, you know, very, very difficult to deal with in any form. You know, there's a movie that actually just before COVID that we were going to preview, that we were actually going to have the first showing here in Eugene, called Dark Waters, which is an astounding documentary, and unfortunately it didn't probably get as much play as it should have because COVID came in at that point in time. You know, this is an issue that we have to deal with as a nation. I've got partial jurisdiction there. Another committee has more jurisdiction, Energy and Commerce, and we both tried to get a very significant regulatory regime in place for PFA production, and again, we couldn't get through the Senate in the last Congress, but I think with the administration this time, it'll happen administratively, or maybe we can get it through the Senate with the change in the Senate. So with that, I'd be happy to take some questions if that's what you want to do, Tracy.
I think that sounds great. And, you know, we do have lots of questions coming in through the chat. So I'll maybe quickly, if there's a pressing question that any of the panelists have or that they want to highlight. Otherwise, I think I may just turn it over to some of those that we're getting in the chat if that works for our panelists. Okay, great. Okay, and I will note that Mayor Rod Cross from Toledo said it is not unusual for 100-year-old pipes in our smaller towns. So I've certainly heard that from a number of communities as well. Yep. So the first question is from Dean Sawyer in Newport. He asks, he indicates in his question that Newport has a dam that is failing and will cost $80 million to replace. They are seeking a change in the infrastructure bill to add municipal dams and not just Army Corps of Engineer dams. So I think the question would be if you have any comments or thoughts around dams that are publicly owned or otherwise.
I'm not intimately familiar with that. I think it's a dam to for water supply, not flood control. Is that correct?
I believe that that is correct, but he can clarify that in the chat, of course.
Okay. You know, that would be more over in potentially out of a FEMA program for resilience and you know, preventing disasters before they happen. I also have a jurisdiction, jurisdiction over a lot of stuff on my committee, over the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And what I'd like to do is put them in touch with my regional person on the committee, Matt Leisure, who carries projects and works on issues for the whole Northwest. And he could also link in with my FEMA staff and see if we could find something in the resilience program that would help deal with that issue. I mean, obviously, you know, we have the potential for the earthquake, which could take the dam to failure very quickly. And you know, we'll like to see what we can do to help.
Great. And feel free to reach out to me, City of Newport, if I can help connect you with Matt in DeFazio's office. So the next question is from the City of Clatskanie. They wrote that the city is much like Monroe in that it needs a new wastewater treatment plant. It says that we need $10 million. The problem is our low to moderate income LMI index is over 56%. Our median annual income is a little over $38,000. We would have to raise rates over $24 per month. This is a massive burden that our small community can't bear. They have talked to Congresswoman Mwmc about this. They want to know if they can get your support to get us the $10 million as a grant.
Well,
direct request.
well, I like people who are direct. I'm pretty direct myself. There is going to be, this year, we are restoring congressionally designated projects in my surface transportation bill, but also the Appropriations Committee is allowing members to submit requests for anything that falls. I mean, every committee falls under their jurisdiction. I mean, my highway trust fund's unique because that's permanent and it's mandatory spending. But when I get into wastewater, I create the authorization. They will disperse the funds. I'll set the criteria for dispersing the funds, but appropriators disperse them. You know, that committee is accepting up to 10 requests from every member of Congress to restore what used to be called earmarks. We've put guide rails on them. There will, you know, we had a few scandals. They can't happen with the reforms we've adopted, and it's going to be a very transparent process. So I would urge them to work with Representative Mwmc for the appropriations process. I think that'd be probably the most appropriate way to go at this point in time. You know, we are going to have, like I say, I am going to establish these grant programs, but again, they are going to be ultimately subject to appropriation.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Mayor Carmichael with City of Gates, and he notes that in Gates and Detroit, we have exponential issues with small lots, old septic systems, and 80% to 50% of our homes and revenues that were destroyed in the Santiam fires. He is flagging that issue as needing a solution to help the residents rebuild, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Congressman.
Yeah, I traveled there with the FEMA administrator back in the fall after the fires and the regional administrator. And I'm very familiar with that issue, given the problems with Blue River in my district, which was unincorporated and didn't have a system that met current code. And we're working our way through the FEMA bureaucracy to see whether or not we can get recovery money that could cover those costs. You know, and so again, I would urge them to, I mean, obviously you're going to want to stay closely in touch with Kurt Schrader, but to contact, you know, Matt Leisure on my staff and or Aaron Davis, the FEMA staff director. And I'm not sure, I don't have a up-to-date brief on where we're at on working on Blue River with FEMA on that. When we were up there, up in Gates, I remember I did have a conversation with the administrator about resilience. And when I said, when we rebuild, we've got to rebuild in a way that the next time this happens, it's not going to go down. And that meant, you know, putting power underground. And I don't know if Gates, of course, if you've had a dispersed system, you know, you probably had the same problems Blue River did, which is where people even had some compliant septics. The fire was so hot, their plastic pipes melted. Because you know, we don't have, you know, like deep frosts, and we don't bury stuff so deep here as they do in other parts of the country. So that's a whole new issue to be dealt with, and that's something that I'm looking at in terms of resilience in rebuilding.
Great. The next question is from the city of Roseburg. They no longer operate a wastewater utility. That service was assumed by Roseburg Urban Sanitary Authority in the mid-1980s. They mentioned that prior to that time, Roseburg did provide wastewater collection and treatment, and the city still owns a wastewater treatment plant that's located in Stewart Park that has been abandoned for about 35 years now. They want to know, they want to be able to demolish the old treatment plant and repurpose the park land. However, without dedicated revenue, there's no funding to demolish the old plant. Will this bill provide funding for agencies that have abandoned infrastructure that needs to be removed or demolished?
I have a staff person on. That's, you know, it's the stump the congressman question. I'm talking about building and upgrading. I don't know about that. Navas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair DeFazio. Navas Bermudez with the Water Resources Subcommittee. There is nothing specific in this bill to deal with that. You know, I think that would be probably something that would come out of EPA's Brownfields program, but I would need more specifics. So, you know, if y'all want to, you can get in touch with me through Matt Leisure again, and we can get the details and point you in the right direction.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I was, yeah, Brownfields. You know, I've been to Stewart Park. I didn't realize, I mean, I'd seen some old structures there. I didn't know what it was. So now I know.
Well, and I will certainly, I'll recommend as well, reaching out to Business Oregon. The Special Public Works Fund might be flexible, potentially enough. I know Chris Bailey serves on the Infrastructure Finance Authority there, but that could be another great resource for City of Roseburg to go to. But our next question is from the City of Pendleton. They did about $19 million in wastewater improvements 10 years ago to address their last NPDES permit that was issued in 2005. DEQ and the city are just kicking off permit discussions, but due to temperature issues, they will have to pull out of the river for about 9 months of the year and look to do land application. They mentioned that due to the topography, they'll have to lift effluent several hundred feet and many miles from their existing facility in order to comply. Due to emerging contaminants, they may have to go to a higher level of treatment, and they estimate the costs are approaching about 20 to 25 million, which doesn't cover the collection system and the 40 million that's needed for their water distribution system. So not really a question in there. I reading through to the end to see if there is one, but I think just flagging the overall need.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to tell the truth, and I don't want to get in trouble here, but I have questions sometimes about DEQ's requirement on the water temperature for discharge. You know, I asked them what are they attempting to achieve? I mean, I know salmon don't like hot water, but you know, before we had the dams, I mean, the Willamette did not run the way it does now, or the Columbia year round. It got quite low, and the temperatures probably got relatively high. So but that's, that's a state issue, but I have raised concerns with them a number of times, particularly, I don't represent anyone on the Columbia, but on their standards for the Willamette and whether or not those are realistic standards to hold people to, particularly given the expense. I mean, what salmon used to do was hole up, and it would be, the river was, we'd have logs and things, and there'd be pools and they'd hole up, but the whole river was never at that low of a temperature. And that's what they're trying to achieve. And I don't know what's achievable.
Great. So I'm going to turn it actually to our panelists again, just to see if they have some questions that they want to ask while I continue to kind of pull some of these questions out of the queue in the chat line so that I can get my list sorted. So Chris, it looks like maybe you have a question to ask.
Sure. And Congressman, I know that you know a lot about how public transit is funded. And we have a small transit system here, so I'm also familiar. And I just am wondering if there are maybe parallels between the way transit is a extremely grant dependent program for those that don't know. But unlike a lot of grants, they're very consistent and reliable sources of funding. And I know this is very different, but an 80-20 match on a capital project in transit really helps limited local funding go a long way. So I'm wondering if there may be some parallels with how these types of grants for wastewater infrastructure might be similar or different to those types of transportation grants.
Well, I am looking, the majority, like I said, the bulk of the money will go into the SRF, but 10 billion is going to be reserved for new programs, including a grant program. That I don't think we have specified whether just.
No, sir, we haven't.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
There is a stormwater program that EPA runs that they've recently put out a formula by which those grants will go out. So we can get that information for you.
Right. I often refer to my staff as my portable memory units, and it's really great to have them here because I'm pretty well versed in this stuff, but I can't quite keep up with everything. So there's that answer. Plus, on the transit side, even though I know that's not a topic for today, I was looking at 106% increase in transit funding, and I have set asides for small and underserved communities and rural communities as part of that plan. And the Biden administration is proposing 140% increase. They don't have policy attached to it, and I expect they will probably follow my lead on the policy, which could help a number of communities that are on this call today with little local transit systems, or some of you that have no transit system, but could benefit from it.
Thank you.
Great. And Matt, did you have a question to ask, or I was trying to manage and see?
I can ask one. Yeah, it was partially addressed earlier. I was just kind of curious with this legislation with respect to forever chemicals, how, if this legislation does anything as far as manufacturing at the source, rather than focusing on removal at the downstream end of the system.
Well, that's beyond the scope of my committee. That would be Energy and Commerce, but I did work with the Energy and Commerce Committee last time, and we did have a comprehensive proposal we partnered on, which went to source pollution, and then some of the areas within my jurisdiction. And that was not acceptable to the then Senate. The Senate has changed, and hopefully, and even, just not get too political here, but you might have noticed that Joe Manchin, the 50th Democratic vote, had some concerns and got changes in the rescue package. Well, the movie Black Waters is based in West Virginia, and they have had probably the largest single disaster relating to these chemicals in that state. So I think he will be supportive, and hopefully we'll get a different result this time. Plus, we now have an EPA. We didn't have an EPA for 4 years. A bunch of political hacks paraded through there. A number resigned in disgrace, and we now have a new secretary. Comes from North Carolina, has extensive experience down there. Got a level head about these things, And I think we're going to find regulatory proposals coming out of EPA for the source. Yeah, we can't chase this stuff around everywhere. We got to stop it from getting in the environment.
Thank you.
Great. And then want to make sure we loop back with the city of Monroe, Steve or Mayor Sheets, if you had a question that you wanted to ask.
I don't at this time.
I'm fine too. Very enjoyable conversation, and I certainly learned a lot, not just from the other speakers, but from the chats as well. So I've been able to take lots of notes. Thank you.
Yes, and I will say there's a lot, there's a lot of good feedback coming in through the chat. To the extent it's kind of hard to keep track of it all and manage it. I will say that I've been copying all of the information we're getting in the chat so that I can be sure to share it with the congressman in his office. And so he's receiving all that feedback. I will say that, Congressman, we're hearing a lot of compelling stories in the chat. Not as many necessarily questions. There are some questions. I'm still trying to get through some of those. But the need is just, as you know, it's really so very significant and impacting the ability of communities to provide critical services, keep rates affordable, as you've already mentioned, and just provide for livable communities. So we're seeing a lot of that. One of the questions that we just received was, what is the timetable for grants and loans? So what kind of timing can folks maybe expect if all things go according to plan?
Well, my intention is to move the bill out of my committee in May. Last year, they took my bill and melded it with other committee bills and had me carry the whole thing on the floor. It was called Moving Forward. We did it, I think, over 3 days just before the July break. And that's the tentative proposal for a schedule. The Senate EPW committee, which has the jurisdictions for this issue, I think they have all of it, and Navas can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they probably have wastewater and drinking water over there. Would be, they're looking at marking up a bill in the end of May. There's 2 other committees of jurisdiction for rail and transit that I'm not sure their timelines, but the Biden administration has a sense of urgency. They feel that we've got to get this done before the August break. Otherwise, we start to get into silly season when you get to fall and people start saying, oh, the next election's only 14 months away. Let's stop doing anything. That's not acceptable. And so I'm hopeful that we would have a program that would kick in next fiscal year, October 1st.
Great.
Oh, can I just, on the compelling stories, make sure that, we're being copied, because compelling stories are great. And I use them on my colleagues. For instance, there are 5 of us in Oregon. 4, I'm sure, are going to be totally on board on what I'm proposing. There may be a question with the 5th, and it would, because I'm had a really hard time getting any Republican on the wastewater bill. I finally got one from Pennsylvania. So compelling stories that relate to the other side of Oregon, other than West Side or Southern Oregon, might prove particularly helpful. That's just a hint.
That's very helpful. And I will absolutely, I've copied all of these down. So I will make sure to send these over to your office. And I'll also extend out the invitation to those that are listening in today. If you want to email me, I'll include those examples and issues and needs in that correspondence back to the congressman.
Bill Rigney from Gold Hill just popped up, and that's a short one. I can see the whole one. I didn't have to touch my screen and lose it. What are their objections? They say it's too much money.
Well, there's a lot of need out there. So, wow, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the economic return is phenomenal. When you look at infrastructure investment, every billion we spend on wastewater creates 20,000 jobs. All those people pay taxes. It raises property values. It allows for economic development. I've never seen it all costed out. But I bet in the end, when you look at the Standard & Poor's and how they talk about infrastructure generally, that the rate of return is like 4 to 1 for federal investment. That's $4 benefit for $1 invested. So yeah, I don't think it's too much money. In fact, it's not enough, but I went as big as I thought I could do.
And again, we appreciate that. And I was just reading an article today that K2 put out about the infrastructure proposal from President Biden, and it talked all about transportation. And I have to say, it kind of broke my heart because the water piece of that is often not talked about enough. So we really do appreciate that. And if you have time, Congressman, for one more question.
Yep.
We've got a question from Hermiston that flagged that a common challenge that they see with federal grant and loan programs is that for cities with a size of 15,000 to 30,000, that they tend to fall into what he describes as the donut hole because they are too large for most grant eligibility that's allowed for smaller cities, and they need to compete then with some of the larger cities. So he's asking if there's any way to strike any middle ground for more grant assistance that could go to some of those medium-sized cities.
Well, I think the way we're looking at grants is essentially on affordability. And so knowing Hermiston, I don't think it's a very particularly high income community, and they may meet the affordability criteria regardless of the population. But again, I would defer to Navis if she wants to comment on that.
Sure, thank you. We've looked at doing set asides within the SRF and included some last Congress in HR 1497, which became part of HR 2 and passed out of the House. That would do set asides for smaller and rural as well as tribal communities. Some of the cutoffs I believe were 15,000, but I think another one was around 2025. And then also there's the affordability aspect, which is another way that EPA looks at communities. And we've asked EPA to look at those criteria because sometimes some of the communities are left out that should be included. So hopefully that would capture your community. We're just looking at a lot of different ways to get folks included.
Okay, but it's a good concern to raise. Appreciate it.
Great. And then we did receive a question, I think it was a good one, that was around whether funds would be available to help small communities, but I'm guessing many size communities would be interested in this, but to update their stormwater systems and maybe where they need to add pretreatment. And so whether that would be something that would be eligible through this funding.
Well, I would assume so. If they have CSOs, again, I'll defer to Navis on that.
Yeah, the HR 1915 actually includes specifically $1 billion in a clean water pilot program for efforts to address wet weather discharges. So that would include stormwater and to deal with integrated water resource management as well. So,
right.
Yes. Sure.
That is great. We are definitely hearing at the League about stormwater needs as really being elevated in a challenge in terms of trying to find the financing necessary to implement some of those requirements. So that's great. Great.
It rains a lot here. Yes, I get that.
It is very wet. So yes. Well, I appreciate that. And looking through just the chat for any final questions that we have here. Again, thank you all for the comments that you've included. It's helpful just to see some of those examples and the need that is existing. I do anticipate that there's going to be a lot of conversations. I think the League is going to be rolling up our sleeves to try and make sure that we're trying to provide any assistance that you all need at the federal level. And we're happy to provide any of the data that we have and some of the scenarios and examples that we're hearing from communities, and just making sure that there's coordination with all of the relief dollars that are coming in through the federal government and the state and locally to jurisdictions. So we really appreciate your time today. And with that, I think, we can probably wrap it up, and I'll make sure to send over all of these really great comments to your office. And if there's any questions in there that I missed, it's possible because there's a lot going on in the chat. Maybe your staff can do some follow-up with individual jurisdictions that have specific questions.
Sure. No, thanks. Thanks, Tracy. And again, remember, the appropriations process again is opened up this year for members to make individual requests. And that could be a channel for some of the needs that have been expressed here today, absent, before even we get to the adoption of the legislation, which I'm proposing in the major infrastructure package. So it's hopefully it's something that's long overdue and whose time has finally come. It will be a long sought after goal by me. This is the third president I've been in a position prominent enough to push hard on infrastructure. And this is the first one who I think might deliver. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.
We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists for participating as well today. And thank you all for attending. We will be in touch. Absolutely, Congressman.
Thank you.
Great job, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of great comments in that chat. So it's hard to get through all of it, but.
Wonderful that he was able to take the time. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it. Good job, Matt. Thank you all.
Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you, Tracy, Matt, and Chris for all your work.
See you later.
Thank you, Tom. Good to see you.
Yes. I will
Thank you,
call-
Tracy.
Tracy, is it okay I give you a call?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you for all you do. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
You too.